Hi, welcome everybody, and welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today we are enjoying a fireside chat with Emily Webber. If this is your first time at CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a little bit about the group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders all around the world. We're focused on supporting technologists and their leadership growth. Community members are currently over 7,000, and CTO Craft provides them with one-to-one coaching, mentoring groups, a curated Slack community, and events just like this one. If you're not a member of CTO Craft community already and you're interested in becoming one, or if you'd just like to get updates on these events on emails, I am posting some links into the chat right now to help you do that. That has worked. Cool. There you go. Right. So, big thanks today to the headline partner, AWS, for helping make these Bytes events possible. I'm Emma Hopkinson-Spark. I am Chief of Staff at a technology consultancy called 101 Ways. My background is coaching and transformation. And I'm joined today by Emily Webber. Do you want to give us a quick intro for yourself, Emily?
Yes. Hello. So I'm Emily. So it's always difficult to say what it is that you do, but I'm an independent consultant. I really kind of agile delivery, transformation, helping organizations create the environments for people to be their best. So I'm super interested in people. I've got a specialism in community of practice, how people learn and progress, how they collaborate and ways of working. So I do lots of things in those kind of areas with various clients.
Awesome, thank you. Those of you joining us today, if you've not used the Crowdcast platform before, let me just give you a little tour around. So because we're on Crowdcast, it does mean that following this, you'll be able to access video straight away if you've already registered. Over on the right, you'll see the chat over there where I've posted those links. By all means, say hello in there, give us your thoughts and your feedback, post any links to anything that's interesting, say hello to one another. And down the bottom, you will see a little button that says ask a question. So as we go through, if there's anything that sparks a particular question for you, if there's something you would like to ask Emily, then pop it in that one and I'll make sure that I call it out as we go. Cool. So let's get started. So Emily, we're talking about Team Onion. I don't like onions, I have to say straight off, but that aside, what is it? What is Team Onion?
So Team Onion is a model. It's a lightweight model. It's a tool to help people collaborate around some really important questions, which is actually I'll go back a little bit where it started. So I was working with an organization where there was an agile team doing great stuff. They were kind of multidisciplinary. They were working together, and you thought, this is brilliant. They're doing great stuff. But they couldn't actually get anything delivered. So there was like, okay, well, what's the point of doing all this great work if you can't actually get it into production? And what transpired when I said, why aren't you, what's the problem here? They said, oh, well, security won't help us, and the business architects won't come to our meetings, and these people and these people and these people. And it was kind of everyone's fault. And then I said, well, have you spoken to them? And they said, well, we've invited these people to our workshops, our all-day workshops, but they don't come. I said, well, do they? They're also very busy. Do they know why you need them there? Or I said, oh no. So what I wanted to do is to say, look, do you know what? Our teams don't just end in our core teams. Especially when we're in larger organizations, we need ways to work with the other people that help us collectively be successful. So the Team Onion is a model to kind of help do that and help teams have sensible conversations about who is it that we actually need to work with, actively collaborate with in order to be successable.
Okay, so I'm sure that's really familiar to lots of people as well, and they're having had those conversations a lot. So it's not the people that are, I guess it's that way of maybe then expanding the team, but not the people that you need all day, every day, but maybe just sort of defining those boundaries and helping people understand how they get involved. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So, because there's a couple of principles around the model. So one of them is around silos. So silos stop work flowing. And actually that language that I heard in that organization where someone is saying security or that team over there, or talking about a group of people as this kind of faceless entity is very siloed language. So it's not saying, oh, it's Tracy. It's saying it's fraud.
It's
them. And when you've got those silos, so, you know, I've done talks that said, hands up if you've got silos in your organization, and everyone puts their hand up, unless maybe you work just with yourself. There's usually some silos somewhere. And those silos, it's kind of, it's the antithesis of empathy. It's like work can't flow across. And so breaking down those silos is really important. And the kind of second principle is that small teams can move faster. So there's a bunch of science around this as well. It's to do with when you're in a group of people, when you're in a team, you need to understand the team dynamic. So that's, how do people communicate with each other? What's the shared history? What's the kind of patterns that people have? But it's not that you just have to understand, like, between you and every single other person on the team. It's how every single person on the team interacts and links with every single other person on the team. So every time you add a new person onto the team, it doesn't add just this one link, it adds these multiple links. And one of the challenges of big teams, I know we talk about this in kind of Agile quite a bit, and 2 pizza teams and 7 plus or minus 2 teams, is there's a huge cognitive overhead to adding new people to teams. So to kind of illustrate that, if you've got 5 people on the team, there's 10 relationships going on. If you've got 14 people on a team, there's 91 relationships going on. And if you have 25 people on the team, there's 300 relationships going on. So this kind of exponential growth is what makes teams move more slowly, because it's you have got all this cognitive load of understanding what's going on. So when, you know, I've seen organizations that are like, well, we need this role and this role and this role and all these roles on a team, and suddenly you've got a team that's got 25 people in it and it can't move very fast because there's this cognitive overload going on. So I think it's part of the team onion as well, is like, how can we reduce that cognitive overhead by saying, no, not everyone needs to be in this core team communicating with each other every day. Who actually sits in our next layer, which is collaborator layer, that the core team need to work with to be effective.
Okay, I'm interested in that. Obviously, we talk a lot about cross-functional teams, and like you say, one of the struggles is okay, you need a UX person, and you need a database specialist, or you need a security specialist, or you need a writer in there as well. And like you say, all of a sudden the team grows and grows. Putting them into that layer, I guess, outside of that, or that sort of transient roles where they come and go, or part-time, or just need them for certain things. Is it moving the problem? How does it actually solve that? Because they still then, presumably, those people have to prioritize their own stuff as well, and are probably working across multiple teams. How do you balance that with, we want a cross-functional team that are able to be completely masters of their own destiny, and we want to sort of manage the number of people and those communication pathways within the team? How does that balance out?
I think the thing is, and there's always, you know, when you're in large organizations, there's always a bit of a struggle bringing everything together. And, you know, there are different approaches to doing some of that, like team topologies everyone loves so much is about kind of reducing that cognitive load as well, and kind of identifying some communication and collaboration patterns. But in essence, the intention of something like the Team Onion is for people to get together and talk about it and be explicit about what it means for somebody to be a collaborator, and then explicitly say, okay, for each of these people in the collaborator ring, it's not just like we interact with them all in the same way, because actually you need different collaboration patterns with different people. So let's identify who they are and how we're going to work with them, and for how long, and what that looks like, and being really explicit about having those conversations rather than making assumptions. So it isn't just, you know, everyone in that ring we treat in exactly the same way. It's like, let's have some sensible conversations, and let's talk to them and say, do you actually have time to do this? And do you understand how we work and the impact of not doing it, or can you make these kind of decisions, and those kind of questions and conversations.
Can you give us some examples then of the types of roles and people that you would see in that collaborator role?
Yeah, so I guess partly it kind of depends on the team. I would, my favorite kind of teams are multidisciplinary. So you have engineers and designers and user researchers and product, and the I think actually it's important here slightly to mention that roles and disciplines aren't the same thing. And you may have somebody, when you talk about your core team, you may have somebody that covers a couple of disciplines. So you're not saying there's one person that solely does this thing and one person that solely does this other thing. Sometimes they may do a number of things. So you may have a designer that's also a user researcher or a content designer or something like that. But in that collaborator ring, it may be that you have security or fraud, for example. It may be another team that you interact with on a regular-ish basis, that you actually kind of need information flowing back and forth, and sometimes you need to collaborate together where there are overlaps. It may be that it's a completely different part of the business, so you're a product team, but you need some regular input from customer service team, and you need to collaborate on solutions with them. I think those are the types of roles. I've been really careful about, and I've seen this challenge before, like designers sometimes get really pulled across different teams. So they end up in a collaborator ring for two teams, and they don't have any time to really work properly on either of them.
Just two? Literally, there's
just two, many teams.
So where have you seen it then? How does a team start to use it? How do they implement that? What is it? I'm assuming from the way that you're describing it as well, it's something that changes over time, so that the people that are in that collaborator ring are not the same people that at the start of something, kicking something off as it gets close to going live, or however it may be. So yeah, how do you use that model in the real world, and how does it change over time?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's worth saying as well, because there's another ring which I haven't talked about, which sits around the outside. So the model itself is 3 rings. In the middle, there's the core team, and the core team is kind of what we'd recognize, I guess, as a delivery team or product team or whatever. The people that work together every day. So in the old world, they probably sat together. In this world, they probably talk together regularly, communicate. Yeah, exactly. Have stand-ups, those kind of things. The next ring is the collaborator ring, which we talked a little bit about. Is that people who bring in specialist knowledge and information. They can unblock things. It's a kind of it's an active role rather than maybe like, we just keep people informed. It's like, who do we actually need to work with to be effective? And them being involved means that later on things are built in a way that meets certain criteria later on. So if you've got someone from security involved early on, for example, that might help you mean that what you're creating meets certain needs or certain standards, so that you're not having to rework later on. And then in the third ring is what we call supporters. So they are people that you might need to align with. They might be senior sponsors. It's more of a, we communicate with this ring rather than we kind of sit down and collaborate regularly with this ring. So these kind of 3 rings. But yeah, over time, so there's kind of a few scenarios. There's a few examples on my website about this as well. So you may, like some people, I've used it quite a lot in kicking new pieces of work off. So you're thinking about, you've got a whole new piece of work to kick off, and you're thinking about who do you actually need to be involved in that piece of work in order for it to be successful. And in that case, you might kind of go, so I've been in the situation where it's not the team doing it, it's people thinking about creating the team in the first place. So what are the and thinking about, instead of thinking about roles, thinking about what are the capabilities, so what is the knowledge, skills and experience we need in this team for them to be successful, and then potentially adding names to that later on. So that's quite a useful place to use it. Also then in team kickoffs, I've used it quite a lot. So if you've got a core team who are already in place, them kind of mapping out, okay, who is it? We've got our core team now, but who is it that we need to work with in order to be successful? So at the kickoff stage, that might be really different from who do we need to work with when we move into a different kind of phase, or maybe we're moving into a beta and actually suddenly we need to collaborate with different people. So, you know, taking that at the beginning, and then when you're moving into new phases, revisiting it and saying, okay, that's where we were, where are we now? And being very careful about, you know, who is it that we're collaborating with? How do we need to talk to them? How often do we need to talk to them? What is it that we need to let them know to kind of help them become a collaborator? Like those kind of questions. I've also seen teams use it. There's an example on the website where there was a team that was completely overwhelmed. So they were they did a lot of support work plus trying to create new features. So that kind of team that ends up getting overwhelmed by support work.
Right.
Loads of people asking them all the time, where's my stuff? Where's my stuff? Where's my stuff? And they were managing other people so much that they had no time to do any actual work. May sound familiar.
Yeah.
So what they wanted to do is they wanted to reduce their cognitive load. So they first of all mapped out who do they engage with regularly, and where are there two people engaging with the same person, or how do they kind of map out everyone that they talk to, and then took that the kind of as is and mapped out what they wanted it to be. So they wanted to move people out of their collaborator ring because there were too many there, and let's kind of move some people further away so we can actually get some work done, and identify where we're all talking to the same person and maybe only one of us talks to that person, and we start to kind of be explicit about some of those routes. And actually they even identified somebody that they all collaborated with that was on another team, and the person on the other team didn't actually do any work with their team. So they were like, oh, they're really a core member, so let's kind of get them to come and sit with this team, so we're not acting like their collaborator when they're a core. So there's a lot of kind of different places that you might use it.
How do you find people react to that? Just obviously we say a lot of those situations feel familiar, and just thinking about some of the conversations I've had with teams in the past and organizations, people can get a little bit precious sometimes about where they sit in the team, and that idea of pushing people further out and up those layers. However, how do people react when you say to them, actually, I know you thought you were part of this core team, but actually you're right over on the edge, and we'll keep you informed, or we'll let you know when we need you. How have you seen that working?
Actually, and although it can feel challenging for some folk, I always think a lot of it is about setting expectations. So with the team that were getting like so many questions that they they didn't have any time to do any work, usually people are asking, where's my stuff, where's my stuff, where's my stuff, when they have no idea where their stuff is, and they don't understand how to engage with the team. They don't understand where they sit and where their requests come. And often when you kind of map that out and say, well, you're here and this is how we're going to engage with you, and this is how we're going to talk to you and how you can talk to us, it kind of settles people down a bit, because they actually go, oh, okay, I get it now.
Right.
I've seen the same thing where I remember I used to work at a government digital service years ago, and we put the entire portfolio of work on the wall, like this big wall, had everything that was going on. And one thing that we found is, again, people were going, when's this and when's this happening and what's going on here? And when they could see where it sat in the backlog, and that there was other things in front of it that were higher priority, but it was there and we hadn't forgotten about it. Suddenly people are like, oh, I get it now. I can, my expectations are kind of managed. I understand what's going on, and that no one's forgetting about me, I think can be quite useful.
So that visualization of their relationship to the team and how that communication is managed, I guess, works in the same way. How do you visualize it with them then? Is it just like the conversation and you leave it, or is it a physical visualization as well? Like you say, putting all the stuff up on the wall. If we had a wall now, would it be up on the wall? How do you make that visible and transparent then?
So with I've got a Miro, obviously, Miro boards. But which is always tough in this new world, right? Because there's how many Miro boards have you got? How often do you go and revisit your Miro boards? Every day.
Yes, lots of different tools, isn't there? And like which one is in which bit, and who's got access to what, and if it's there, it's not really visible. You have to go and look at it. It's not like being on the wall, is it?
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's important with all these things. It's like there's a workshop technique which helps have conversations, but then it's of no use if you've gone, well, we had the conversation, even if we just put it on the wall at that point in time, it's like, what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. So with something like the Team Onion, it's like we've identified these are the people that we need to work with. Now, who on this team is going to go and have those conversations, and how are we going to kind of actively make this a reality rather than it just being this artifact that sits there? Everyone goes, oh, we had a great workshop, pats each other on the back, and then you never see it again.
Awesome. Just a reminder to everybody in the audience as well, I can still see people joining as well. Do ask any questions if there's something specific, if it sparks some interest or some imagination and you want to know more specifics that I'm not asking, jump in with the ask a question, and Emily will answer that too. So on that, how do people get started then? If somebody thinks, oh, I'd love to start to map that out, I think you mentioned your website already. What's your advice to people to get started with that kind of tool?
So I think, and like the first thing, like anything, so I've seen people go, oh, I'll just map out the onion, map out my onion. It's like anything. So you could do it on your own, and that's not. It's useful as a thinking tool, but that's not kind of really where the real value is, because the real value is in all of these things. It's like having the conversations and having that collaborative workshop. So the first thing is based on your situation, is who are the right people to get in the room to have that conversation. So that would always be my first, like, what is that? What is it we're trying to do with this? Who are the people that we need in the room to have these conversations? And then, spend some time mapping out, who is in your core. Are those the right people that are in your core? Who are in your collaborator ring, and who are your supporter rings? And then, so my door just gave me a shock. Then it's what are we actively going to do with these people? So let's take our collaborators, because what you might find is that there's loads of people that you could work with. There's tons of people there's all these people that we could collaborate with, or we're going to need to work with at some point in time. You need to prioritize them. So who is it that who's got the greatest impact right now? It's kind of a thing you can think about. There's a grid where you can say who will have the most impact and who's the easiest to engage with, and maybe those are the first people that you engage with, that you say, oh, we're already working with them, let's just kind of put some parameters or formalize that slightly. Or there's that person over there that we don't need to work with them just yet, and we've never even spoken to them, so maybe they're not on our priority list right now. And then taking your supporters and going, okay, how are we going to communicate with these people? How are we going to make sure they know what's going on?
How much do you find it varies then? Because I know it's the classic, it depends. And I can think of half a dozen clients right now where all of those communication plans that you might need for different supporters will be different in every organization. But how much of that is common, really? You must have seen lots that are the same. Is there a basic model that you would start with on some of that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, So with the collaborators, it's with the supporters. I'm going to start with. So they doing things like demos and show and tells, and just having those in place, and using that list as who are we going to make sure, who we're going to invite to our demos, who do we want to know what's going on, what we're learning. That's kind of, I guess, the baseline of that. With the collaborators, it might be, might be that you're going to meet them once a week, or I think that's the one where I think it depends more than anything. And it might be that I said with one client way back, I said, you really need to build relationships with this particular group that are really fundamental to your success, but you're at kind of loggerheads. Let's actually focus on building some empathy and have people, physically, back when we could, or back when people were always in offices, bring them over to have them just sit with you for a day. Because all that kind of chatter that you get when you're in the same vicinity as people kind of helps build that empathy. And when you build that empathy and those connections, everything else is much easier. It's much easier to work together. It's much easier to move forward. So I guess my answer is it depends.
One of the other things that strikes me as well is, I guess, very reminiscent of like early days of trying to get people to understand the way that Scrum works, or Kanban, or any kind of Agile framework. In fact, there are still organizations that do it, kind of blame the tool, or blame the, as in Scrum's not working, we can't get stuff done, it's Scrum, that's the problem. I guess the way that you're describing that visualization of the team, I can see being really useful visualization tool, but it's not going to solve any of those dependency problems or collaboration problems. If you've got people that you need time from the regulatory compliance team who haven't got any time to come and spend with you, identifying that they're in that ring of collaborators isn't going to solve the problem of them actually doing the collaboration with you. So how does it help then? What value is it, and how do you help get over those hurdles?
Yeah, I think you talk to people, and this is like everything.
Revolutionary.
I know, like, talk to people and ask them and explain what it is you're trying to do, and why you need their help, and what happens, how you're going to work, like, work together to work out what happens if you don't get their help. I always think so. Way back, I've got a slight story for you. Way back, when I was working at an agency that built websites. Remember those? And it was a very nervous client, and we were building a website where there was a campaign where people were given samples on a night out of his product, and there were photographers out, and they would take photos of the people on their nights out, and the next day they would upload them to the website, which doesn't sound very revolutionary, but at the time there wasn't a lot of photo sharing, and the client was super nervous, and they said, security and compliance are just never going to sign this off. And like normal, they'd given us hardly any time to actually do the work. They'd suddenly remembered they need a website, even though they'd already set up the sampling campaign. They never sign it off. They take ages to sign anything off. And what we did is we said, okay, so who's the person who signs it off? And they said, oh, it's so-and-so. And we said, oh, brilliant. Set up a meeting with them, and then started talking to them on a regular basis and going, this is what we're planning. Is there anything that you would change? And got them involved really early on. And when it came to sign off, it took them 2 hours to sign it off, which the client was like, this never happens. And it was this amazing thing of talking to people. But not only that, if you've ever been in a situation, as I'm sure you have, where someone says, I've done all this work, can you sign it off? And you're like, I've never seen this before. I don't know anything about it. But you're asking me to put my name to it, to prove it in some way. That's a really awful situation to put somebody in. And unsurprisingly, it takes them quite a long time to kind of get their head around what's going on. And and they haven't been able to input earlier on, so they might be like, well, you need to change this and you need to change this, and we can't put that live because of this, that, and the other. Yeah, so I think that I think talking to people is very valuable.
I think it'll never catch on, that. There is something in that, isn't there? As far as like, if somebody gives you a big fait accompli, almost there's sometimes a pressure to, I must input into this, or the way that I'll add value onto this is to go and add a comment here, or to suggest some changes here, or give them all the reasons why what they're thinking here won't work. Whereas actually, if you've involved them in creating it in the first place, then it's theirs as well, and so they're more invested in it by the time it gets to the end too. Yes, but no, I'd say it'll never catch on. It's a crazy idea. No one will ever do that. We've got a question from Michael who says, how do you establish roles and responsibilities in the end? So in each of those layers, where do the roles and responsibilities come from? How do you define it?
Oh, that's an interesting one. And I was having a conversation with somebody just before this session about roles and responsibilities, and kind of actually trying to break people out of them a little bit. Because I think we're in a time, and this is really front of mind for me at the moment, is a conversation that I keep having, and it's a pattern that I keep seeing in different organizations, where it feels like we are moving towards more and more role silos than ever. I don't know if you have seen this. It's like people are like, I'm this role. Sorry, you have.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And whenever you're saying I'm this, you're also saying I'm not any of this. It's like, yeah.
And I've seen this. Well, I'm this role, so I do that. You can't do. Don't step on my toes. I'm keeping this, and people get quite precious, which is really when you're talking about the point of multidisciplinary teams is there are actually blended edges, and it's bringing all these deep expertise together to solve a problem. But when you're saying no, I do this and then I hand it over to you, and then you do that and you hand it over to someone else, you're kind of essentially like silos within the team and handoffs, which we know slow things down, and that's really problematic. So one thing that I like to do is talk about capabilities, and I guess capabilities and responsibility kind of feeds into that as well. So the way I describe capability is the knowledge, skills, and experience applied to create an outcome. So it's like there's kind of a number of aspects to it. And so when you think about that and you think about your team, it's like, okay, what's the knowledge and skills and experience we need? What's the kind of outcomes we need? And then also like to kind of think about the fact that you might say, okay, you've got somebody that's, we need user research in this team. So we've got this user researcher, and they are the person in the team that's going to lead on user research. But there are other people in the team that have some skills as well. So they're going to be involved whilst the user researcher leads on how we're going about it. Other people are involved too. So try and bring it back to the kind of roles and responsibilities. So first of all, when you're talking about your core, it's thinking about, what's the knowledge, skills, and experience we need, and the types of stuff you might normally do on your team. When you're looking outside of that, again, it's like, what are the outcomes that we need? So is it that we need to make sure we're compliant in, I don't know, we've got ISO 27001 certification. We need to make sure we're compliant in that. So therefore, in our collaborator ring, we need somebody that's going to be able to help us be compliant. So therefore, who might that person be? And they might be somebody that has a certain amount of experience. It might be someone that has a certain amount of empowerment to make certain decisions. And that's the way that I would think about it. It's like rather kind of matching the people with the need, rather than just saying we need these roles.
Okay, but named individuals in those rings is going to be the key then. So it's not just a function, it's not like, in the collaboration ring we need a security person or a compliance person. You need individual names who know that you need them and that they're part of that wider ring.
Yeah, totally. And that's, again, it's about like building those relationships, because we all know that, you know, when you want something done, you're probably going to pick up the phone to somebody, or pick up Slack or whatever, to somebody that you already know, because you can say, hey, Emma, do you mind just doing this thing for me? And you'd be like, oh yeah, that's cool. If it's somebody you've never met before, it's like, hey, somebody I've never met before, do you mind helping me out? And they're like, well,
hey,
I've got all these people asking me, so you're the end of the queue.
Faceless group of people that need to do something. Yeah. What if they don't then? What if you're relying on somebody and they're not part of your core team, so it's not like they're accountable to one another day in, day out, and you're not getting what you need from people in that collaborator ring? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually, and it's at that point when you've got a risk, right? So this is a real risk. If you know you need input from somewhere else and you're not going to get it, then you need to probably manage that in a way that you would manage a risk, which is go back to your sponsors and say, how are we going to sort this out?
Do you see that often?
I have seen it, yes, but it's, and this is the challenge, and this was the challenge with the first team that I saw that were like, oh, we invite people to our workshops, but they don't show up. It's like other people have priorities. So where do you sit in those priorities? And there's a real question there, because if you really need input from over here and you can't get it because it's not an organizational priority, that's like, well, what does the organization want to do? Do they want to say they shouldn't be working on that thing over there? They should be working on this thing over here. There's kind of a bigger question there about what is it that we as an organization are focused on.
And at least you can make it visible and make that transparent, so you can have the conversation about it rather than it just not get done and then get swept under the rug somewhere. Yeah. Okay. The other thing that strikes me, just in the way that you're talking about it, and maybe it's just because where we've started, is a lot of the way you described it seems very team centric, it's like in service of. I totally see why it's valuable to people in that core team to understand who they're dealing with day to day and who and when they need to pull on outside and who they need to keep informed. So it's a very core team centric view of the looking out of the onion rather than looking in, if that makes sense. So what, first of all, do you recognize that, and does that sound right from the way that we've talked about it so far? And then if it is, what value and how do you articulate that value to people on that outer ring as well then?
So yeah, and that's often I use it from that way, because it kind of empowers the team to think about their own success, really. But I've seen other people use it from the outside as well. So I think one thing to note is that your onions will overlap, because you're not this isolated onion over here. There's people that you might sit in a core team here and a collaborator ring over here, and there might be people that are in multiple collaborator rings. I was just having a conversation with somebody about using the team onion to understand, actually kind of map out how the organization does, how these different rings overlap, and the kind of current state, and then a to be like, what is it that you actually want? So does it make sense that somebody is in 5 collaborator rings and 1 core team? Probably not, because that's not going to get anything done. Yeah. So using it at a kind of slightly more holistic level to say, are we putting too much pressure on each of these individuals? And if and where might the gaps be? So there is the kind of the other way to look at it. I've seen somebody as well that's taken it and had people put themselves, like, where do you want to be, like kind of more kind of senior stakeholders, where do you want to be, and let themselves kind of pick if they want to be in different people's collaborator and supporter rings. And sometimes that action of going, well, I've put myself in 10 of these, now I'm going to think about that doesn't make any sense. How do I kind of remove myself from some of them? So yeah, there is a different way to look at it.
And just picture it now as a big, like all the different teams and how you identify one or two across lots of ones. Like it would be an interesting thing to map out on a larger organization as well.
Yeah, and I think it becomes quite people-centric then, and that's what because I'd rather talk about things in those terms. It's like it's people-centric because you're going, are these individuals, does this make sense for these individuals, or have we got them like 200% capacity, and that makes no sense, and no wonder work isn't getting done because we're putting so much pressure on people, which is kind of different from taking it from a communication pattern point of view.
We've got another question come in as well. It says, multidisciplinary teams often change quickly with workforce change. How do you introduce new colleagues to the concept of the onion quickly without disruption?
Yeah, interesting. I guess I always think that I think we're in a challenging time because lots of organizations, people are leaving and joining, and this is always a problem, and it's very disruptive for teams anyway. I always think that when new people join a team, there is it makes sense to do a little bit of a kind of team reset, and that might be, how do we work as a team? What are our communication norms? What are our ways of working, our cadences? And I think it probably sits in there. And the challenge with this is if your team is changing on a daily basis, like are you having these resets? But I think for anything, coming into a new team and not getting any of that context is really hard, because suddenly you don't know any of those. You don't know any of those things. How do we work together? Who are we working with? So I think taking people, like, kind of resetting, these are our values as a team, these are our ways of working, and this is our team onion, is a quite a useful thing to do. That isn't a particular technique, but it might just be getting people in a room and talking through it. I actually, sorry.
Yeah, part of that onboarding, I guess, is understand it's a very simple way of visualizing actually the interaction that they need between different people.
Yeah. I actually think it's quite important in those sessions just to get people understanding a bit more about how each other like to work and like to be communicated with, and all of those things that just makes it easier for everybody to work together.
Interesting. Okay. Move on from that one. Okay. I'm really interested in, we're talking about putting stuff up on the wall and the difference now, your Miro boards. How are you seeing that in the we've always had to manage with hybrid working, and I remember, going a long time ago with different, people on phone calls or experimenting with lots of people in one room, lots of people in the other. How are you finding it different now working like this, like we have done for the last couple of years? Is it more valuable than ever? I should imagine it probably is. And what impact has it had really in the change of the way that we're working?
Yeah, I don't think anyone's quite worked out how we're working at the moment. I am really interested in, just in general, how organizations are maintaining connection across different bits of them whilst people are working from home or not, or working from the office, but not ever crossing paths with other teams. I think it's all very easy just to kind of tunnel in on, like, this is the team that I work with, and these are the only people that I talk to. So that the need for kind of finding ways for people to bump into each other or see what other people are up to and other people's work is kind of more than ever probably right now. I don't know what the answer is. Communities of practice is always a good answer, as I would always say. Yeah.
Interesting you mentioned like communities of practice. I know you say that's something you really specialize in as well. Does the same model apply to those communities as well, or is it just we're talking about? Is it is it a model that's specific to product or software delivery teams, or how translatable is it to other groups?
Yeah, so I tend to keep communities of practice. I have different, there's different ways that people engage with communities of practice anywhere. Similarly, there's a kind of core, always a core, right? And the core, like in the team onion, like the team wouldn't exist or a community wouldn't exist without a core. Otherwise, you can't just have collaborators and supporters. But with a community, you tend to have active participants, occasional participants, and peripheral participants. So there's definitely some parallels, but it's a little bit different because you're not working towards an outcome in quite the same way.
Yeah, so that role of responsibility, the way that you communicate might have some similarities, but it's like you dependent on different people at different times, different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So what kind of scale have you implemented it in then? I always say, like, you can just imagine a large organization and how all of those onions fit together. What's the largest you've seen kind of map it out like that?
I haven't seen it particularly large yet. As I said, I was just having a conversation with someone about how we could do it across a program. And I've seen some folks do it across a program, but mainly focused on the team level, as we've talked about. And I think, and some of that is that it's, I always kind of move towards how do we make things smaller sometimes because of that scale issues. And it's talking about you mentioned communities of practice, and I've done a bit of research in the past about scale of communities of practice, and I talk about Dunbar's number. I've talked about this. I talk about this in Team Onion as well. So Dunbar is an evolutionary anthropologist who has studied group sizes, and he started out studying primates, and then I think he lost that funding, so just studied humans instead. So a little bit more accessible, less traveling to do, and has this kind of idea that it's all to do with the size of our brains, and this is kind of cognitive load. Size of our brains is that human groups tend to be roughly around the same size. So Dunbar's number talks about the number of friends you can have, really, and it breaks down to like 5. This is rough, depending on who the person is, but you have kind of 5 kind of inner circle people. You have an extra 10, so 15 in total, kind of close friends, 50 good friends, 150 friends, and there's 500 acquaintances and 1,500 people that you can put names and faces to. And I'm always really interested because I'll go into an organization to help them with communities of practice, for example, and there's community leaders that are like, oh, we grew our community and made it bigger, we made it bigger. And I'm sometimes like, well, that's not always the right, big isn't always the right thing to do, because you can't be like friends with 5,000 people.
Yeah.
So what kind of makes sense? And similarly with the Team Onion, so how do we make, what are those, and on the website I talk about kind of size guide, which roughly kind of follows some of the rings that Robin Dunbar talks about. It's like, how do we kind of make those small enough so that they don't become too big? And actually the conversation I was having with someone earlier was that the teams were like, we want big room planning and we think we need scale. And we're talking about using the Team Onion to kind of quash some of that. Like, we don't need to scale. We can like we can map, we can illustrate this stuff, but maybe we don't need to get everybody into a room together, because all that's going to do is cause confusion, and not everybody needs to know everything about every other team all at once, all the time, because it's just too much to know, and you will never get any work done.
On the numbers then, and you mentioned a couple of, certainly in those the smaller end of the scale as far as the Dunbar numbers. How does that then relate to the rings in the onion? So 5 is obviously a very familiar number to us, and a nice number for that core team. How many people is it reasonable to have in that collaborator ring then, or in the supporter ring? Does it relate to those numbers that you're describing as far as time goes?
So my advice is, and I think it's the kind of active collaboration that you have kind of, it's anywhere between 4 and 12 people in that active collaboration. So the more people you need to collaborate with, the more time you spend collaborating and the less time you'll spend doing work. And the supporter ring can be a bit bigger. So I'm saying it's kind of up to 30 people, but it could be less because they're a little bit more about communicating out to and less about spending time working with. So there's some rough guides there, but some of that is also going to depend on, when you go into your retros, it's like how much time are we spending collaborating with people, and is this working for us, or do we need to change it at all?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting then on the retros and lean into that. We've got about 10 minutes left, by the way, if there is any more questions from the audience. How do people adapt it? And then when you get into retros and things, how much actually gets changed in practice? Is it about moving people in and out of the different rings, or flexing the sizes, or what adaptations have you seen?
I think people tend to revisit their team onion when they're at different phases. So it's less like, let's have a look at it every 2 weeks, because not much really is going to change. But let's have a look at it when we move into a different phase that might change our team makeup. So if you're in an early kind of discovery phase, you've got your team's going to be different size than if you were like a live service or operational service. So it's those phases can be quite useful points to revisit and say, does this still look right? Unless you're trying to actively move towards something and you want to keep like reviewing where are we and are we where we want to be yet?
Right. Okay. In the last few minutes then, what tips, advice, stories can you share then? People want to get started, where should they go? Are there any situations where you wouldn't advise people want to look at it? What can you tell people to get going with something?
I think firstly, if you're interested in doing it, obviously, convince your teammates that it's worth doing. I've run this little exercise before, which is always quite fun. I'm going to be doing it at Agile Cambridge next week, where you get a bunch of people just to kind of remind people why they need something like this. Get a bunch of people and say, you're the team. Maybe it's like 4 people, 5 people, and you give them some tokens that represent user stories, for example, and say, right, okay, this is the beginning of your iteration or sprint or however it is that you work. Pick up user stories, pass them around at the end of the sprint, put them on the table. Everything's done. Brilliant. We achieved all of our stories. Everyone's happy. And then I'll often kind of say, okay, now I need like a couple more people. This person's security. This person's in procurement. This person's another team. And they get in the line as well. They pass things around. And as the things come to them, say, when the thing comes to you, hold on to it. Don't give it to anyone else. So they've passed their stories around. These extra people, security, procurement, can't remember what the last one I said was, are holding on to all the stories. Say, okay, end of the sprint, what is it that you delivered? And so you delivered nothing. And that tends to resonate with people quite a lot. I'm sure we have all been in a situation where you pick up a piece of work, you're like, great, starting this piece of work, can't get it out to production. We delivered nothing this week. Right. So that's always a nice little way to kind of convince people. So getting people convinced. There's a website at teamonion.works. There's some tools on there as well. There's some slides. It talks about things like the links that I talked about at the beginning, showing how, the bigger a team gets, the more links you have, the more cognitive load there is, kind of keeping up with everything that's going on. There's a Miro board there as well, which has templates in it. So I'd get together in a room or virtual room, whatever makes sense, and just and try it out and really kind of place, the value is in those conversations, and try it out, see what happens.
Cool. I have posted that teammenu.works link over in the chat for anyone that's interested. I'm also posting a few more links right now. In there you will see contact details for Emily and myself. By all means, connect on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm sure you're happy as well, Emily. If people do that and have more questions, then do reach out. Also down there, I have posted a link to the next CTO Craft Bytes, which is following on in the series of CTO fundamentals, and that is happening next week. We only have a couple of minutes left anyway. I don't think there's any more questions from the audience, but any closing thoughts or any sort of giving them the link to the website, anything else you want to share with people, closing thoughts, something?
No, I think yeah, as I said earlier, talking to people and remembering that you're all in it together.
Radical concept.
Magical concept is really important. Like if you do hear that kind of siloed language, so thinking about how you can break those silos down and kind of embrace the fact that you're generally working together towards some kind of common goal.
I think one of the things that strikes me is it doesn't solve it. It's not going to solve your communication problems or your dependency problems. But as we all know, sometimes just being able to visualize it and have a really honest conversation about that is halfway there, isn't it? At least you know what you're dealing with then, and it's nice and visual. Cool.
Yeah.
I still don't like onions, but cool. Right, thank you very much, Emily. Everyone else, you have the links over there. You can rewatch this now. You've got the link to it, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Emily. Bye-bye.
Thanks.